poets and procrastinators, readers and seekers in trousers or tiaras, nonconformists and unbelievers, gender X and gender equals. Welcome to Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast, coming to you pre-recorded on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes. Basically, wherever is your preferred podcast platform, that's where you can find us. And thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Damien B Donnelly. I get to be your host and producer. This is episode 15, season 6, which means this is the final episode of season 6. So thank you so much for everyone for tuning in, and most importantly, thank you to the over 400 poets from around the world who've made this podcast platform possible. I started this podcast back in 2020 when I hardly knew a single poet, so I'm forever grateful to everyone who has reached out, taken part, cheered and supported. And today, for our final episode, although please note we will be back with season 7 at the end of April, beginning of May, so if you want to take part, you can find all the details over at eatthestorms.com. But today, we have 4 more fantastic guests here to share their voices with you. We have a 70th birthday celebration from a poet who's just published a collection of 70 poems, each with 14 lines. We have a 3rd appearance from a poet bringing us gathering dust porcelain dolls, trying harder, trying to avoid the twisting arms that end in hooks. We have last goodbyes, final glimpses, final goodbyes after the better days have run dry. And beautiful losses. The things to fall back on, and those grand hotel abysses of the non-belongers, and of course, a storm or two. So grab yourself a glass of wine or a cup of tea, a ginger biscuit or a slice of carrot cake, turn off the phone, find your favourite seat and let these poets entertain you. My name is Damien B Donnelly, this is Eat the Storms, and I hope you enjoy the show. And first up today, we are starting with a birthday celebration, so I do hope you have a slice of cake candy because our next poet is 70 years old today. So firstly, a huge happy birthday and congratulations on the publication of your 2nd poetry collection, More Patina Than Gleam, published by Arachne Press. This is a collection of 70 poems, with each poem featuring 14 lines. This poet lives in Edinburgh, where she finds many sources of inspiration for her poems in the surrounding countryside. You will have probably read her poems in places like Southlight, Northwards Now and The Poet and Geek. She has been commended in places like Bridport Prize, the Baker Prize and Buzzwords, and she won the Wigtown Poetry Prize in 2012. She is also the author of Let Out the Gin from Arachne Press. I am delighted to welcome for the first time to Eat the Storms, birthday lass, Jane Aldous.
Hi Damien. Thank you for inviting me to join you on your podcast, particularly as today is my birthday. I also feel very fortunate that Cherry Potts, my editor at Arachne Press, said yes to publishing a 2nd collection of poems called More Patina Than Gleam. And I guess the book grew from an idea to celebrate my 70th birthday by writing 70 14-line poems. It might seem a little bit ambitious, but I thought I'd just take one poem at a time and just see how it went. Before I'd written barely a few, though, I realised that a story was beginning and I had really no idea what would happen next. I think of each poem as a chapter in the story. There are a number of threads crisscrossing each other, stories of survival, loss, being an outsider, but most of all, I think of the book as a love story of friendship, family loyalties being tested, and romance, often awkwardly expressed, and a love letter to Edinburgh. I've lived in Edinburgh longer than I've lived anywhere, and I really, at this stage, I really wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I'm about to read poems voiced by three main characters, Linda, Ange and Elsie. Some of the poems are inspired by real people, real places in the city, conversations or remarks that happened, or small incidental things smuggled in, but mostly it was as if the poems took on a life of their own. Now, the book is set in the early 1960s, and the character of Linda came about as a scenario emerged, really inspired by my own mother telling me that endlessly, really, a lot, many times, that she wanted to run away with me when I was a baby. But here in my book, a young woman in her 20s is forced to leave her home in the north of England in the 1960s with her young daughter Ange because of the frightening behaviour of the man she lives with. They flee to Edinburgh, and Linda starts work as a lady's companion, which is a role that still existed in the 60s for women whose circumstances meant they'd lost their income or their security or both. Linda and Ange find themselves in a once fairly grand, now pretty run-down house in the Edinburgh suburbs, owned by a Jewish woman called Elsie. As an early reader of the book says, it's a novella in 70 poems. I really love that description. Oh, and just to mention, the fourth character to give voice this afternoon is the narrator. And this first poem I'm going to read narrates the scene as Linda and Ange stand on Blackford Hill, having just arrived in the city in the middle of winter. This is Arrival. No one paid attention to the woman and child not dressed for snow, standing on the hilltop path, watching the lights on the Forth, listening to the calls of ravens and crows. They could have passed for locals, but as the woman gazed out to sea, she prayed for anonymity. She wondered why there was a gasometer up here, buttoned up her coat, tightened her headscarf, drew the child closer. No one guessed how far they'd come, exchanging smog for smoky lums. Tonight they'd be in strange beds in a large genteel house with its own secrets, big windows and dark trees. Tomorrow she'd become a lady's companion with an unfathomable future. Now, Linda's daughter, Ange, is 11 years old, and she really surprised me with her feisty voice as she encountered Elsie for the first time. Children are from a strange country. She could have turned us away, told us she'd changed her mind. Instead, she opened the door, led us down a bare wood corridor with faded rugs into a room with an oval table and offered us hot pot. Children are from a strange country, I always think, she said. My mother smiled. I went red. I never mentioned this again, but was left wondering if I'd ever make it to her country, and if so, when. And the next poem describes the early days of Linda settling into her new role in the house, on the road leading up to Blackford Hill, as well as a glimpse into Elsie's personality. Observatory Road. How do you live when circumstances force you together, strangers not friends, in a house where the unspoken makes the air tense? Miss Datlow was kind, but there was more to being a lady's companion than she'd gathered from their correspondence. She hardly left the house for a week, with all the floor sweeping and washing of clothes, but they were safe and well fed, she told herself. One day the lady said, "Let's go to Jenna's tea room." She looked around at all the other women, felt she was dreaming, asked, "Why did you take us in?" Miss Datlow replied, "Once I was a stranger too. Fancy a nip of whiskey in your brew?" The way I think about writing poetry is it can feel a bit like being possessed by a poem, in a good way, of course, and that even if you're writing rubbish, you know that you're having the best time doing it. The next poem is an example of one that was kind of half written in my head as I was cleaning the bathroom, and it refused to go away. Because of my own background, my own family background, my own personal background, it only felt a relatively short stretch to imagine the kind of work a lady's companion might have been expected to do about 60 years ago. This poem, written in Linda's voice, eventually provided a title for the whole book, which I hope sums up a kind of familiar, rackety, warm spirit that I'm really drawn to, but which nevertheless has many frustrations. Gleam. Who was trying to make an impression on whom? Maybe the drifts of stir were too much, even for her. Anyway, early on, she got me dusting skirting boards and wainscoting, wiping fingerprints off windowsills, long dead insects trapped behind shutters, fettling out dust and dead skin, cat's claws and dog's dander, polishing the silver till it resembled moonlight. Now here I am, paid companion, more intimate than friend, wielding bicarbonate of soda, vim, black lead and bleach, in a house held together with more patina than gleam. I think you have to love a house to clean it, every awkward bit, or else it never is. Thank you once more, Damien. It's been a delight to read for you and to get your invitation. And thank you for being the host of such a fabulous podcast. Many thanks.
Next up, I'm delighted to welcome a returning guest to Each of the Storms, and as we say here in the podcast, once a guest stormer, always a welcomed returning stormer. This time we have a poet rejoining us from the coastal city of Portsmouth in England for the third time. He is the author of Ariel Sweet Shop, which was published by Alien Bother Press, from which you'll hear poems today. But you've also probably seen him in places like Pink Plastic House, Famidan Journal, Green Ink Poetry, Dreek, and in the Madrigal's recent December issue, which we got to appear in together. So I'm delighted he's back with us today, taking a break from working on his new collection, his husband and their 9 cats. This is Lawrence Moore.
Hi, I'm Lawrence Moore, and I'm super happy to be making my third appearance on Eat the Storms. I'm currently working on my next poetry manuscript, shaping up to be a deep dive into spectrums of caution and adventure, of despondency and stubborn resolve, with the odd mythical creature thrown in for good measure. These poems are reflections of that, and I'm going to start with one that was first published in Pink Plastic House. Porcelain Doll. I'm a porcelain doll, one careful owner, gathering dust in a decorative box. My expression is hard to unravel, but in the shade you might call it a frown. When taken out on rainy days for safety play, I try to tell him I'm stronger, but my lips never seem to move. He kisses me sweetly, cocoons me neatly inside the dark. I resolve to try harder, but when you're always looking after yourself like you were a porcelain doll, then in time, a lie gathers truth. Running contrary to my first poem, here's A Creature I Should Meet. I've slept inside a bedroom warm and staid for all my boresome non-existent years. Tonight I'll shut my eyes beneath the moon, the crocodile's too late for shedding tears. Spare pillows under sheets for alibis, with every step my shadow disappears. And every guarded gate becomes a path, adventures that were theirs will soon be mine. Perhaps I'll find the entrance to a cave, or sense a fleeting shape so long declined. If I should hear the snapping of a branch, I may look up, I'll never look behind. They told me of a creature I should meet in long-remembered rhymes from tattered books, the hopeless searching eyes and loping gait, the twisted heart, the arms that end in hooks. They told me of the one from which it hides, those rhymes, how many prisoners they took. The forest looms before me as I walk. I watch the sunlight struggle through the shade. The hoof steps are approaching all around. A muffled screech resounds, begins to fade. I never want to do as I am told. That's not the way romantic tales are made. The next poem expresses my admiration for the kind of person who can confront their traumas and come away from the experience with something positive. Beneath the darkness. She treads the tree-lined evening way, scattering spectres of the past, subordinated to her command. The animals maintain their gaze without fear, accepting her as one of their own. She acknowledges kinship, but wishes to be left to her wounds, believing there is work to be done between them. Ready for battle should they refuse to be tamed, a peaceful resolution remains her goal. Beneath the darkness there hides a gentle soul. Perhaps it's time for a little divine intervention. This next poem is called Harmless Tinkering. We see you, little one, trudging in your hapless way along the fine shifting line between hope and despair. We know this cruel world of productivity and growth offers no dockleaf for the nettle stings of apparent fate. We see your distant dreams and obscure methodology. We find the quaintness of it all a pleasant distraction from weightier matters. We know you are almost stuck now, but everything's going to be more than okay, and you will know ecstasy long before the end. Safe in the knowledge that you read these words without conviction or faith, we can nudge your subconscious without spoiling all the fun. Here's a poem that reminds me of an adventure holiday with my school friends, aged 11, where the more worldly boys in our shared dorm would try to guide the rest of us through the mysterious subject of romance. Dark ancient woods. In middle school huddles, the other boys talked about the rituals enacted in dark ancient woods. Perhaps that's where they disappeared. The door knocked. I rose, stretched my back and went outside. You whispered you had come, then took me near and far away, from road to trodden path to hidden hollow. I went along because it was time and you were you. I stood there, braced for harshness, death and ridicule. None came. Just a gentle, faltering hand, flicking a rusty cobwebbed switch from off to on. I don't remember letting go, but I remember your soft cries as you told of how you'd circled before, without daring to venture in. I kissed you and said, "We're here." The last poem I'm going to read today was first published on the excellent Fevers of the Mind blog. I've always found something enchanting in the sight of an old oak, situated all by itself, so I started musing on the subject, and this is what came to me. One tiny anonymous speck. On the main road, twice a day, we'd pass our venerable tree, standing alone in the poppy field, and every time our eyes would stray with wonder towards its towering grandeur, verticality of stance, without any sense of envy, seeing nothing to be gained from the upright life that leads us to a solitary death. I am a gnarly, twisted shrub, and your limbs were never destined for straightness. So if you find me leaning your way until we are nearly touching, there is no malfunction. I'm just hoping one day we can fade and fall apart together, one tiny anonymous speck blending into the background of our choice. Thanks for listening, everyone, and thank you so much to Damien for having me back on. I've really enjoyed myself.
Now, for my next guest, we are staying in the United Kingdom to welcome another returning guest to the podcast who is from North Wales but now lives in Hampshire in England. If you are a regular at the wonderful Flight of the Dragonfly spoken word events, whether that is their live shows in Brighton or their live Zoom shows online, you will be very familiar with her work. And if you've read their online journal Flights or their recent published anthology Take Flight, you will certainly be familiar with her work. She started writing poetry about 7 years ago at Insight, an LGBTQ+ event, and since then she has performed in places like Polari, Moving Voices and of course Flight of the Dragonflies. Her first pamphlet will be out later this year and I cannot wait to read it. The subject matter is mental health, self-harm, suicide, death, all issues that are close to her heart as they are from her own experience, and she hopes that these poems will resonate, and believe me, as you'll hear today, they certainly do. I'm delighted to welcome back to Eat the Storms, Faith Joanne.
Hi, so my first poem is I Really Miss My Highs. I'm sitting on the clouds, surrounded by angels. I feel like I'm one of them. I'm riding the waves, I'm at the top of my game, just me and the dream. Who wants to join me on the high of the century? It's fucking amazing. Follow me. I'm awake. My eyes are wide open. The brain cells are buzzing. My energy is endless. Let's talk. Let's talk. Let's drink. Let's smoke. Let's absorb the music. We're riding with the roof off, come rain or shine. Can you feel it on your face? The pull of the eyes, the cuteness. I feel I'm the most beautiful woman in the world. Sex is a drug I have to have. Do you like books? Do you like films? I want to be Thelma and Louise. I want to drive and never look back. I'm dancing, I'm twirling. The beat is in my soul. Please let this feeling last forever. Talk with me, smoke with me, drink with me, dance with me, ride with me, fuck with me, if you dare. Join with me on the mother of all highs. Will you land with me? You with me? So my second poem is called When Did You Say Goodbye? Was it the last time I saw you? Was it the last time you text? Was it the last time we met, you and me? Tea, biscuits, making plans, talking and dreaming of better days. You wanted it to stay this way. Stop the clock, pause the movie of your life. In this moment, you were happy. You smiled, you laughed, you relaxed for the first time in months. I thought you'd turned a corner. Had you already decided? Had you made up your mind about this? Was it our last meeting? Maybe that's why you seemed carefree. In your eyes I saw freedom. Freedom from the agony of your unhappy thoughts. The fight was over. You'd cut the rope of anxiety and depression. Sleepless nights. Tears that wouldn't run dry. It was obvious to you. As clear as day. Everything that had happened led you to this day. Finally, you were free. So my third poem is called Flirting with Death. I'm a flirt. You know that. You know that, but I have a more sinister side that you don't know. I like to flirt with death. To you, this may sound crazy. To me, it's my secret world, my oasis, the place I can hide in, no one will ever enter. Or know what happens in there. I have a mental illness that most people don't see. A few I tell, but mostly I don't think people realise how dangerous it is. Not to them, but to me. I'm very good at hiding the thoughts you don't see. I tell you what I want to tell you, what I want that I know you will cope with. My secret mind garden is something else. The danger lies in the realisation that if my thought becomes real, if I decide to bring it into the living, breathing world, however, to me, my thoughts feel safe, because they are with me. No one can hear them. No one can judge them. No one can try to stop them. They are mine. They are my friends. We love to talk and discuss and dream of better worlds, lives. We like to talk about death, more specifically, me causing my own death. But why? Because it's my choice? Because it's something I can control? Nobody killed me. No disease killed me. I didn't get old and fade away. Unless you think my bipolar mind could one day kill me, in one of the ways I imagine, I flirt with, then yes, a disease of the mind could and may kill me. But I like to think it was me, solely me, who decided to hold hands with the angel of death on a day I appoint and organise meticulously, for reasons you don't need to know, for my life is not owned by you. You may try and hold me tightly, not really knowing what is to come, but without your knowledge, one day I'll loosen my grip on this reality and peel my hand from yours when you're not looking, and gently walk away on the path I've chosen, the other reality I've dreamed of. No goodbyes from me, no tears from me, just a silent adieu. The sun will dim, the air will stagnate. A single white feather will slowly, second by second, fall silently from heaven. Thank you.
Now we are leaving the United Kingdom and heading over to the United States to welcome our final guest on the show today. This time it is a first-timer to Eat the Storms. He is the author of 2 full-length narrative poems, The Adventure, which was published by Storyline Press in 1986 and reissued in April of last year by Red Hen Press, and Happiness, also from Storyline Press in 1998. He is also the author of 3 collections of poetry, including A Poverty of Words from Prolific Press in 2015, and, as you'll hear today, his new collection, The Beautiful Losses, to be published very soon by Better Than Starbucks Books. His work has been published widely in places like Hudson Review, Poetry Salzburg Review, The Fish Anthology, Neon, Magma, Blazevox and Triggerfish. I am delighted to hand you over to Frederick Pollack.
Hello, I'm Frederick Pollack, and I've published 5 books, and I'm going to read 8 minutes worth of poems from my most recent book, The Beautiful Losses. Role model. It must have been in Mother's 3rd trimester that I began to hear talk about, quote, having something to fall back on. Retreating as far as I could in my cramped quarters, I brooded. Fall back on what? Non-being? I barely left. and from what? One still has at that point some enthusiasm for life, but I gathered the smugly servile voice meant something else. The larger question was, who was talking? My aunts and uncles were gentle, much put upon, not, quote, successful. My parents were archetypes. They'd never give me a rung on or push up the ladder. It must have been the spirit of the age, one of delis and print shops, not trillionaires. Nevertheless, I came out arguing with whoever it was. Nothing I had to say was lucrative, i.e. necessary. But as I spoke, I went on a long time, necessity itself, abashed, retreated, and only what I had to say was left. Call. An office as tenuous as fog. Someone unpaid except in their own youth mans the phone, the computer. Never enough money, time, ventilation, coffee, understanding, or patience, though the latter is total. Even the word client marks a defeat somewhere in deep time, a failure of relationship. Lawyers have clients, but law here is the opponent in a perpetual judo. And is the one crying or barely verbal on the phone who is bleeding, quote, from wherever, unquote, evicted, hungry, to be killed for, quote, honor, unquote, guilty since birth, a client? Doctors at least have patience, but how to diagnose one who calls without power, while the one who answers has no power but answering? I, who don't belong here, tired of Grand Hotel Abyss, wanted to praise heroes, and am immature enough to imagine an armed, confident man. But all I found, all anyone can find, are mice in the granary of suffering, and the advice of Lenin that finally revolution is an affair of clerks and accountants. Gate of Horn. My best ideas come from the edge of sleep, where financial projections are doubted, the medical question tabled, the report on means and ends returned for editing, where a corrupt yet timid republic yields with a sigh to a king who is swiftly deposed by a shadowy placeholder god, who turns over power to a Khan, maddest of rulers, deeply wishing the good of all, yet given to laughter and debauchery in his distant, isolated, soundproof palace. It's he who fears nothing, who encourages promulgation of world-overthrowing, anarcho-critical ideas that are entirely suppressed or, if not, sent back for peer review, though peerless, subjected to focus groups that never quite focus, are burnt by reactionary forces and gather dust for decades in the files of the Standing Committee. The Towel. The lover sits unnoticed in a corner. He has taken the form of a print on the wall, a light green jacket hung from the back of a chair. The composition of the print, the fact that the jacket might slip, are that delightful, painful tension a lover feels. So is the sound of West Side traffic through the closed window. It's autumn. He wishes that noise weren't here, but behind the half-open door of her bathroom, she ignores it. Towels herself dry. The towel is 2/3 as long as herself. In the mirror, checks for lines. There are none. A new hairdryer has a pleasant warmth and roar, as if furnaces had cubs. Her hair is compliant. Though her thoughts are elsewhere, the hair frames her face like one. The robe on the back of the bathroom door is also green. In a moment, the lover will be there, but for now, though glad, she has only begun to prepare. Steps into the room, half lowers the blind, hangs up the jacket, and is at this moment the way she might exist in an old man's mind. Late Valentine. The last emperor of that dynasty went mad. As barbarian horsemen trampled his armies in the western waste, he proclaimed a new palace in the mountains. A dragon had shown it to him in a dream. Whole herds of dragons could disport on its terraces, bathe in its pools. Half his surviving peasantry could dine there. Each beam, each fluted tile would be propitious. The greatest architect of the age, not even a eunuch, stayed loyal to the madman, who confided that the idea had not come, as he had told his concubines, from the dragon of genius, but a barbarian god, whose powers were immense though somehow plebeian, and whose kingdom was distastefully far away. He wished this god to stand with his consort at some distant time on the balcony of the new palace, embrace her, state his deathless love, while enjoying the view of huts and woods and peaks, and could not be gainsaid. The architect drew up plans, work even began, but now the valley is damned. There isn't even a ruin, just semi-adequate workers' housing. I'm sorry, honey. He tried.
Now, that is all from my guest on today's show, but before we finish up, I'm going to leave you with a couple of poems from my full collection, Enough, which was graciously published by the Hedgehog Poetry Press last August. These poems that I'm going to share with you today are all on the theme of scent, those that are still with me, and the ones that I left behind on the streets of Paris. This first one is called 62 Rue d'Alésia, or 62 Street of Elysia, and it's after Henry Miller and Anais Nin, who dined, dated and desired at the Café Les Ayres. I used to sit here, sipping cocktails I couldn't afford just because you sat here, years before me, drinking lust from lips that weren't yours. I used to sit here, in the heady heat of all you had eaten of each other, wondering if I stayed long enough, would I be able to taste what it was like to devour all that desire? I used to come here, to scribble down all I might one day forget, and I wondered if she forgot you as quickly as she turned the page to the next date in her diary. Paris is burning. I've sat and watched smoke slip from my lips, like it's that simple to let out all we've taken in. Echoes now. On this street where once there were windmills, where once I wished for smoking to cauterize all that time hadn't taken from the tongue. Smoking, that older vantage point. The scent of nicotine nudging nostrils, tinged with all the things this city once brought to my lips. Some scenes we are stuck with. The hold of that hand in the taxi as we left the city I hadn't yet said goodbye to. And you, latching on to something that hadn't been formed. Some scents are forever tied to necks where we've left the lie of our lips. Like you said yesterday, when I found you crossing back over after so long on the other side, and the first thing you mentioned was my scent. Still that scent. Some things latch on like limbs, and I wonder if you will sniff still when I slip you from my spotlight as another taxi carries me off. Le parfum de la jeunesse, the perfume of youth. Walkways of dog shit and metros that open into underground pathways of piss. Narrow stairwells of nicotine-knotted railings and croissant crumbs squashed into cornered crevices. Two-legged dogs on tiptoes licking at large while their pit-bull four-legged fancies in diamond chokers hump deserted scooters in middle paths of main streets, and yet we come just like cattle into the chaos, munching our way from the farms of everywhere else to the stench of what we have now come to classify as cult. Conditioned in cold canisters, 19 square meters and shit squatting in posh toilets with paper towels that can tear through any crack. Concrete does not have a lasting scent. It doesn't even rot. So we paint it with dimensions it can never contain, like the yellow brick road, once diversions from witches that were never really wretched. A scent to sail you back. The lilt of lavender that lingered long after, by the leaning before the Louvre. The blossom of fallen rain making its way around the curve of every cobble. The seduction of Greece, sandwiched into the darkness of a sandwich grec before the dawn. The sweet consolation of candy floss cologne that clung to the pillow after you'd left. Sometimes it's that simple, a scent to sail you back. And finally, when I left her, knowing, I walk over drying leaves, crisp tissue freshly fallen underfoot in this season of the fall. Some things stay attached, while others change their tempo, turn, take off. Au revoir, I whispered, and you smiled, knowing I'd be back. Poets and procrastinators, readers and seekers, in trousers or tiaras, nonconformers and unbelievers, gender X and gender equals. We've reached the end of the final episode of Eat the Storms, the Poetry Podcast Season 6. Thank you so much to all of you for tuning in, whether that has been on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes. Basically, anywhere that you like to call your preferred podcast platform, that's where you can find us. My name is Damien B Donnelly. I've been your host and producer, and I'm so grateful to my guests today, new and returning, and they have been Jane Aldous, Lawrence Moore, Faith, Joanne and Frederick Pollack. As always, for details on all of my guests on today's show and for all of the guests over all of our 6 seasons, you can head on over to www.eathestorms.com, click on the podcast section, and there you will find a listing for every episode. This was episode 15, season 6, and in that blog post you will find photos, bios, social media handles, links to websites where you can find, follow and be their fans. Now, while you are there, you will also find details on how to be a guest yourself on the show. So if you are a poet who writes in diaries, in journals, publishes in anthologies, reads at open mics, or has multiple prize-winning collections, then you are very welcome to be a guest on this podcast, because this is a platform for poets of all ages, sizes, styles, colours, creativities, but most of all, it's a platform for diversity, regardless of where you are in your poetic career. So the podcast is now over. We will be back with you again for season 7 sometime around the end of April, the beginning of May, which is possibly also the time that we will be announcing details for issue 3 of The Storms, our printed journal of poetry, prose and visual arts. If you haven't grabbed a copy of our inaugural issue or issue 2, which was just published this January, you can buy one over at the website eathestorms.com or in stores here in Ireland, and they are Books Upstairs, the Whiting Stair Bookshop in Dublin, Charlie Burns in Galway, Dingle Bookshop in County Kerry, Books at One in County Mayo, and the Secret Bookshelf in County Antrim in Northern Ireland. So until we're back with you on the podcast, or until we bump into each other at a book launch or a Zoom launch or a reading or some form of celebration, please be safe, be well. If you're in Ireland, don't drown yourself in the liquid shamrock on the 17th of March. If you're a tourist in Dublin here in Ireland, why not drop by the Neoclassical Casino in Marina, where you'll catch me giving guided tours from the 17th of March until the end of October. But most of all, and most importantly, it goes without saying, although we must say it, stay bloody poetic!
Oh, thank you.